And welcome back. The U.S. Supreme Court is poised to overturn Roe v. Wade, which is the landmark decision that upheld the right to an abortion in the U.S. for the last 50 years. Now, if overturned, abortion would immediately be banned in 23 states across the country. Our next guest recently introduced several bills into the state legislature to help protect and improve access for both residents and people who travel to NYC for abortion access. And joining me now to share more is the New York State Senator of the 34th District, Alessandra Biaggi. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, especially to talk about this important issue.
Yeah, it's an important issue. And we understand, first of all, this is leaked out. And we get a little bit of a glimpse as to possibly what the Supreme Court will do. Your thoughts on, first of all, what you heard via the leak and your response to that?
Well, I mean, I wish I could say to you that I was surprised by the contents of the leak, but unfortunately, I've been really following along what the GOP has been doing for not just the past few years, but really for the past 50 years since Roe became the law of the land, which is essentially introducing bills in state legislatures to really make abortion illegal. And so, you know, I think the part about the leak that was shocking was really just the leak itself, frankly, because it's unprecedented. We have never had a leak in the Supreme Court when it comes to an opinion that's as controversial or even at all, because really a lot of the times those are opinions that are kept under lock and key. What I will say, though, is that there's a lot of outrage from the right, or from the Republican Party, about how, you know, it's undemocratic and it's chipping away at our institution of the Supreme Court and what it means and its integrity to, you know, have this leak happen. I would like to actually just, you know, for all of your viewers, point out that that's a distraction from what is actually in the opinion itself, which is frankly devastating, because we know that abortion is healthcare. We know that the loss of Roe and the overturning of Roe will really make us lose lives. And there is really no such thing as a ban on abortion. There's only a ban on safe abortions. And so frankly, by overturning Roe in the Supreme Court, which we really can expect to be finalized really any day now, what we're doing essentially is putting the lives of millions of people at risk, and that is unacceptable. And so that's where a state like New York comes in.
And when we talk about New York State, let's talk about you for a minute, because you saw pretty much what was getting ready to happen. And we all know it inevitably will happen. But then you said that you wanted to create some legislation to be able to assist those right here in the state of New York. And I want to talk about the Fire Hate Act. Make our viewers aware a little bit about the Fire Hate Act, because this will assist people who are traveling here in New York City.
Absolutely. So listen, I think that New York State, being a state which has Democratic control, and other sister states that have Democratic control, really has to be a state that leads the way and also sets the standard as a reproductive sanctuary state. And so I introduced the Fire Hate Act in the most recent weeks, which is legislation that creates a cause of action for unlawful interference with protected rights under the civil rights law. So, like, what does that even mean? It means that we are seeing that there are states who say to their residents, if you leave the state that you live in and you go to a state like New York and you try to get an abortion or other gender-affirming care, we as a state are going to prosecute you. We as a state are going to hunt you down. We're going to fine you. We're going to arrest you, and we're going to do whatever it takes so that you understand the consequences of your action, which is completely absurd and ridiculous. And so states like New York obviously have a role to play, which is to really make sure that we put as many protections into our law as possible. And so what the Fire Hate Act does is it creates a counterclaim in instances where a person left their own state, came to New York, and attempted to exercise their rights under New York state law to obtain an abortion, and really make sure that that individual, when they are sued by their state, which is really a crazy thing to say, is able to then say, no, I actually have a counterclaim under New York state law to counter what you're trying to do to me. And for us, that's one layer of protection that we can provide. There are obviously other bills in the legislature right now that have been introduced by my colleagues that really will allow for even further protection. For example, you know, basically telling law enforcement they are not allowed to comply with the laws of Oklahoma or the laws of, Alabama that essentially are establishing bounty hunters. But unfortunately, more and more states across the country are considering legislation to punish people who leave the state to get an abortion. And so it's really imperative that, again, states like New York and California and others allow individuals who have traveled to New York or to other places to get an abortion legally to have real protections that will allow them to not be hunted down by their state and their, legal system, which again, it's just a crazy concept, but the concept is about to become reality.
When we talk about the states that are or I should say, anti-abortion, we know that New York State, a sanctuary state. What does it feel like for you as a woman to have New York as a sanctuary state? You're a woman, an elected official, and one who understands the power of this legislation. What's it like having New York here as that state?
Well, it feels really good, except that, New York almost didn't have the right to an abortion in our law. And we almost didn't have it because my predecessor spent a decade with our former governor preventing the bill, the Reproductive Health Act, which would make Roe state law, would make an abortion legal. They prevented it from coming to the floor and having a vote, even though it is popular amongst not just Democrats, but amongst voters in this country. People who support abortion, they support it by 70% in this country. That is an incredible number to just focus on when we're thinking about this issue. And so, fast forward here, after the legislative session, when we codified Roe into our law, that July, I introduced another bill because in my mind, I knew that Republicans will stop at nothing to take away the right to an abortion. And so that's also why I introduced the Abortion Access Fund, which is a fund that would be able to be used for things like transportation, travel, for the medical service itself, for lost wages, because we know not just New Yorkers, but people are going to come from out of state to really be able to access our healthcare system. And so, I've been really thinking about this issue, not just in my first race for the state Senate. It was really the pillar of my race. It was one of the most important things, but I've been thinking about it every day since I won. And since we passed the Reproductive Health Act, because again, Republicans will stop at nothing to make abortion illegal. And so that means that it is our responsibility to do everything that we can to actually ensure that this right is not just given, but also accessible to people.
So when you talk about yourself putting legislation forward, give us a little bit inside the political process for somebody that may not be so familiar. You've introduced legislation. Where does it go? How long before we can find out what happens?
So the Abortion Access Fund, which I just mentioned, is a bill that I introduced in July of 2019. And so it has been sitting in committee for almost 3.5 years now, and we haven't really moved it. And so for me, that with all due respect to our state and everyone who is committed to public service, I think it's really important that New Yorkers understand that when we wait to act on things that we stand for example, the right to an abortion, for example, climate, for example, housing, healthcare, all the things that we say we stand for, if we wait until those are things that are being threatened, or those are issues that are, coming into the center of the discussion, then we've frankly lost the battle, because if the enemy is at the door, then we have waited too long. And so even though the enemy is at the door, I just want to be very clear, we still have a little bit of time before the Supreme Court overturns Roe. And so these are bills that are currently sitting in committee. My understanding is that there will be a package of abortion bills that will be passed in the next few weeks. And what that means is that, before the legislative session ends next week on Wednesday, before we gavel out, we will pass these bills, and hopefully they will go to the governor's desk and that she will sign them immediately. And so that's really the legislative process there. I will also say that there have been a lot of creative responses from my colleagues on what to do. And I feel really proud to be part of a body of people who are thinking about this issue in almost the same way as Republicans have been thinking about it, except that we're thinking about it in a way of protecting rights, whereas they are thinking about it in a way, when I say they, the GOP, is thinking about it in a way to roll back our rights. And, before I'm sure we move on to the next topic, I want to just say that this issue of abortion and rolling back the right to an abortion is rooted in the right to privacy. This is only going to be the beginning of the Supreme Court's reversal of certain rights. They will not stop at abortion. They will absolutely continue to roll back rights, whether it's LGBTQ plus rights, whether it's interracial marriage, which has been brought up in so many different conversations, and unfortunately in the news when it's being reported on, because this decision that has been leaked has references to cases that affect these kinds of rights. And so we really have to be vigilant about how we are protecting rights in New York State at a time when our Supreme Court has completely lost its way, because the things that they are doing and the decisions they are about to make are not popular decisions with most of the American people. And so they should expect that there will be not only a pushback, but an uprising.
Yeah. Senator Biaggi, let me switch fronts. As you said, we do want to switch topics for a minute. Thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit more about another bill of yours. This one was passed passed recently on May the 10th, dealing with cosmetic animal testing. And so for you, it had to be a good feeling seeing your legislation that we talked about pass, and talk about what it means and what we'll see going forward.
Sure. So I am really proud to be the sponsor of the Cruelty-Free Cosmetic Act. This is a bill that I introduced with Assemblymember Rosenthal, who represents parts of Manhattan. It's a bill that is important because every single day, cosmetic companies are subjecting animals to really horrifying tests that include harsh chemicals, only to determine if they cause allergic reactions or are dangerous to inhale and ingest, and to make sure that they're safe for humans. Why does this matter? Because protecting our safety by testing cosmetics, even though that is extremely important, we all know and can agree that that's extremely important, but that should not mean that animals have to serve at the expense of our well-being. And so modern medical and technical advances have really created safe and humane alternatives to animal testing, and many new cosmetics can actually easily be tested really just by existing ingredients that have well-established histories of safe use. I will also just note that the European Union, India, Taiwan, New Zealand, Norway, South Korea, Switzerland, and Guatemala have all become cruelty-free cosmetic markets, as have several U.S. states. And so New York will join these states in leading the way in leading the charge really to end animal testing and cruel animal testing. And so, before we again close on this issue, I want to just say that this was an issue that has been really, pending in New York for almost 20 years. It was a bill that was actually carried by a Republican colleague of mine, Senator Phil Boyle, who spent so much of his life not only caring about this topic, but researching it and drafting legislation for it. And, there are very few instances that I can point to where there is agreement across the aisle. But when it came to this bill, I really had a partnership in Senator Boyle, who truly came not only to the conversation and to the table with a lot of information, but also came with a willingness to draft an op-ed and to really raise awareness and to prove, I think, that we can still find ways to work together even when we agree on most things.
Yeah, a lot going on, and I want to continue to get our viewers a little bit more, in tune with what's happening. Talk to me a little bit about the bill here, because this bill is a bill that you say people ought to watch out for, where it talks about fashion sustainability and social accountability act. This is a bill that a lot of people need to watch out for. From your perspective, talk to us about what would happen under this.
So I'm so glad that we're talking about this bill, because when I introduced the Fashion Sustainability and Social Accountability Act, it basically blew the lid off really what was going on and what is going on in the fashion industry. For those who don't know, the fashion industry is one of those industries, one of the few industries in the world left that is unregulated. What do I mean by that? When we think about regulated industries, we think about energy, we think about the automobile industry, we think about food, although we could do a lot more with regulating food standards today. However, we don't really think about fashion. And so, when I was in law school at Fordham Law through the Fashion Law Institute, I learned that there was such a gap in the regulation of the fashion industry. Why should anybody care? Okay, because apparel and footwear companies and fashion companies are not only responsible for almost 9% of global greenhouse gas emissions, but they are also responsible for some of the most egregious violations of labor laws. And so what this bill will do is require apparel and footwear companies that make over $100 million in gross earnings a year worldwide. If these companies make that revenue worldwide and are doing business in New York, then they're required to follow this law. This is what the law says. It says that you, company, must map your supply chain and make clear and common disclosures about labor impacts. It also says that companies are required to engage in mandatory due diligence to improve their labor practices. What does that mean in layman's terms? It means that if in the disclosure they find that there are labor violations, then not only must it be disclosed, but there must be efforts that are taken to actually improve the labor practices and also the environmental outcomes. It also requires companies to set and to meet science-based targets so that we can reduce the carbon footprint of the fashion industry. And then it has an enforcement component. We want this bill to be enforced by the Attorney General. Companies that do not comply are given 3 months to get into compliance. And if they don't, then they may be fined up to 2% of their annual revenue, which then will go into an environmental justice fund to serve and help environmental justice communities that have been impacted, of course, by so many of the just neglect and unfortunate real disregard for the people who have lived in some of these EJ communities across the state.
A really aggressive bill. Talk to me about what it feels like from the eyes and the lens of some of your counterparts and your colleagues. What are you hearing when it comes to this?
You know, a lot of people, first of all, don't know that the fashion industry is unregulated. So I think that's the first place that we begin, where there's really an educational process of understanding what impact the fashion industry is making across the world. Beyond that, they're also shocked to learn about, frankly, the tremendous amount of greenhouse gas emissions that this industry is emitting across the globe. There are people who have joined and supported as co-sponsors of this bill, and to them we are very grateful. And then there are others who are more reluctant because they're concerned about the industry. Here's what I'm going to say to that. There is not a single soul on earth or a single industry on earth that is going to get out of this climate crisis without doing something about it. So everybody's going to have to come to the table, and every single industry that contributes to the climate crisis is responsible. And even though the fashion industry likes to say that they are organic or sustainable or that their materials are recycled, it's not enough. And the reason it's not enough is because recycling clothing or textiles or saying that you are going to, make jeans in a more sustainable way is not definable. It doesn't mean anything. We can't measure it. And when we can't measure things and when we can't see into the processes of these companies, to be honest with you, they're essentially operating in a black box. It's harmful, not just to the human beings who are part of the industry, but to the rest of us in this world who are impacted by the negative effects of how the fashion industry is functioning. For those who are watching, and also for you, later today, I encourage you to just do a quick Google search and look up the Atacama Desert in Chile. What you will see are images of clothing from the United States that has been dumped into the desert, and it goes on for miles. There is a drone image that goes on for miles, and one of the most stark images is a human being in this desert picking up a shirt, looking at it, and what's on it? A TJ Maxx tag.
So where do you go from here? Because when you talk about really spreading the word, making people more aware, you're saying to us that a lot of people really aren't aware of what's going on right now. Yeah.
I think that for where we go is, if you're hearing this and you're thinking to yourself, oh my God, yeah, like I donate my clothes every year. Do they end up in the desert? Like, where are my belongings going? New York City has a textile recycling program. Notably, I will say that the New York City textile recycling program does not actually extend to the Bronx. And so that is a massive problem that we as elected officials, and something that I will be working on this summer, is a high priority for me. But beyond that, if you are someone who cares about this issue and you do believe that every elected official's top priority should be the climate crisis, then I encourage you to make sure that your assembly member or your state senator is signed onto this bill, and then join us and be part of the coalition that we are building to make sure that this industry is regulated.
Last question I'll ask in regards to this particular topic right here. You said the Bronx is not included. Any particular reason why the Bronx has been left out of this?
Well, so the Bronx, of course, is included in my bill, but the New York City program to recycle textiles is not included in, for some reason, the program. Why? What is my reasoning, or why do I think? Because oftentimes the Bronx is left out of everything. And it's been something that I have said from the moment that I got elected and during my campaign. And it's something I say every day. It is completely outrageous in a city with as many resources and as many human beings working in city government. Actually, New York City is the #1 employer in New York State, that we would ever think about the Bronx last. We should be thinking about the Bronx first. Why? Because we know that the Bronx has the worst health outcomes of any other county in the state of New York. And so I will not only be working to change that, but I will be changing that. And I really, just a message to those who are making these decisions: stop keeping the Bronx out of your programs, of your processes, and stop keeping the voice of the people who live in the Bronx out of the conversation, because when you do that, you harm all of New York.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say that you didn't put it in the bill. I know that you had the Bronx covered in the bill there, but I meant when it came to talking about the textiles. But listen, talk to me a little bit about resources. We were talking about that. And I want to talk for a moment about COVID-19, because as we're still coming out of it, numbers seem to have spiked up and then gotten better. And, the ladder continues, up, down, up, down. However, when it comes to resources in the community, I think a lot of people have talked about, when it came to COVID, that we were really just overmatched. Talk to us about where we are today in your district and how you're navigating this.
So, I remember talking to you in March of 2020, and it feels like almost 40 years ago at this point, when we really didn't know much and we didn't know what was happening or what really to do about it. But we did know that there was going to be a tremendous amount of need for basic necessities. And so, where we are now is, unfortunately, we're experiencing another surge of COVID-19 across New York. The Bronx has not been exempt from that, unfortunately. And unfortunately, again, we see a recent increases across the district I represent in District 34, especially in neighborhoods like Kingsbridge and Castle Hill and Morris Park and others. And because of this, the New York City Health Department has recommended that people wear high-quality masks in all public indoor settings and crowded outdoor spaces so that we can limit the spread. I really encourage not only New Yorkers, but anybody who's traveling to New York also to follow this set of guidelines, and really to just continue to not only keep your booster card updated and continue to get boosted and vaccinated, but to continue to tell those who are not vaccinated to get vaccinated, because since the start of this pandemic, I think that is the most important real barrier that we have to fight this virus. I mean, in addition to that, I will just also say that, my office has made COVID-19 recovery a priority. I honestly can't believe that it's 2022 and we are still dealing with this. But really what that has meant is that my office has continued to just grow the partnerships that we've had from the beginning of this pandemic with other organizations and groups throughout the district to make sure that we can provide food and resources to the community. In terms of food distributions, we have partnered with organizations like the Hunts Point Produce Market. We have partnered with more local CBOs and made sure that anybody who is food insecure or who is afraid still to go to the supermarket or is, immunocompromised or doesn't have family members that can help them are people that we are serving every single day. In addition to that, when it comes to resource distributions, we have done, I can't even count anymore because there are just so many distributions we've done since 2020 with community boards and other local orgs to make sure that we are giving away masks and COVID-19 tests alcohol wipes, et cetera, to, constituents across this district. And really, I could never have done this. I want to just be very clear, because so seldom do they get recognition, but I could never have done this without my team. I have, so many people who are dedicated to this community and making sure that their needs are met. A young woman on my team, Joanna, has honestly not slept, it feels like, since 2020, because she has just been serving constituents across this borough. And, many hands make light work. And so if you are someone who's watching this, who has a few hours, who wants to help our team out, we would be so happy to have you join us to make sure that not only can you help, but if you also have resources, or if you are somebody who needs resources, that you let us know so we can actually get you what you need.
We talked, I remember in 2020, we talked about resources. We also talked about small businesses, right? And the challenge that small businesses were having, because there was little access to the PPP loans. First of all, they didn't come out for a while. And then finally, when they did come out, there was no access to them. A lot of businesses really were trying to really recover. When you look at small businesses in your neighborhood now and you do a deep dive assessment as to where they are in 2022, how do you see things?
I mean, I wish I could say that all the small businesses had the ability to take advantage of all the programs that we had not only passed, but the money that we had put into the programs so that they could recover. My team spent the entire summer, last summer, literally canvassing. I'm not even joking. Every single neighborhood in District 34, going business to business to business to business, to make sure that the workers and the owners knew that there were grants available, that, of course, since it's a grant, you don't have to repay it, so that they could actually get money up to $50,000 for any lost earnings or lost wages or whatever it might be that they would need help with. I really, I've seen, if you just go down certain, heavily trafficked areas or heavily or large business corridors throughout the Bronx, there are still so many businesses that have remained closed. There's a lot of empty commercial real estate that we've seen. And, this is not I don't want this to be misinterpreted as my, as my dire desire to get people to go back to the office, because I do think that we actually have completely transformed the future of work through this pandemic, and that for those who don't have to be in an office, I think the future of work will mean that they will be remote, I think most of the time. But then again, we have brick and mortar, mom and pop, small businesses who have been in communities for literally decades and for generations that are really on the brink also of closing. And so there is always more that we can do. And I think I would also be remiss if I did not mention that, rental assistants and also tenants who are in the Bronx, honestly, facing an eviction crisis that is off the charts. I mean, the number of eviction cases that are being brought by landlords is so high that New York City is not even able to meet the need to provide attorneys for these individuals. By the way, New York City is required to provide attorneys. That is part of the law. So if you are being evicted, you are entitled to an attorney. But then there's not even enough attorneys to deal with all the cases and to really make sure that these individuals are being represented. And so for the state, what we've done is we've opened again the emergency rental assistance program that is accepting applications, but funding is extremely limited. So what I would say is that if you are someone who is really, either in arrears or owe rent back or, money for utilities, I recommend you applying for this program. Its shorthand is Erap, Emergency Rental Assistance Program, especially if you're at risk of being evicted. It will, if it doesn't provide funding, what it will do is it will provide applicants with protection against eviction until a final decision on their application is made. That is a really important thing that I think we have to make sure everybody knows.
We talked about the fact that when it came to evictions, we knew that this was going to come, right? We knew that once the moratorium was going to be over, that we would see an increase in evictions, already coupled with a backlog of cases that were in housing court pre-COVID. So now you've got pre-COVID cases, you've got these eviction cases, and you've got judges and you've got not enough lawyers. You've got a backlog of a system. But are you optimistic that in the short term that we'll be able to navigate, particularly for people who are dealing with this housing crisis, or that there's going to be some sufficient help to be able to help them through? Because if there isn't, we know what the bottom line is going to be. But Erap opening up is just one door, but I think there's going to be a few more that need to be open.
Let me tell you something. That's like music to my ears, because I think that there are not enough elected officials who are ringing the bell on how many New Yorkers are on the brink of becoming unhoused and having to, move into a homeless shelter with their families, which frankly, nobody should have to encounter or deal with, especially after these past 2 years in New York, where we have honestly pushed New Yorkers to the limit of what they can tolerate and handle. And so, there are things that can be done. And I would again be remiss if I left this segment without mentioning Good Cause, which is a bill that is carried by Senator Salazar in the Senate. It's a bill I co-sponsor. If you are a Bronx elected official and you are not supportive of this bill, I don't think that you understand the crisis that is at hand. And I encourage you to walk the streets and talk to people that you represent to understand really the housing crisis that we are in and the ways in which tenants are consistently abused by their landlords. I will also just say that I'm sure if you do a quick Google search on Good Cause and the bill, there is a lot of misinformation, and we should ask ourselves why that is. It's because it's a threat to the power of the real estate industry, and it's completely bogus to say that this is a bill that's going to, decimate the real estate industry. I will also say we need more housing. So at the same time that we have to protect tenants who live in the places that they live, we also need to build more housing. And so those two things are not inconsistent. This is not an attack on the real estate industry. This is honestly a necessity to make sure that we don't continue to force people to not only live on New York City streets, but to be displaced and unhoused.
Senator Alessandra Biaggi, thank you so much for sharing with us. A lot to unpack here, but certainly a lot to look forward to. The legislation has been passed, legislation that is being proposed, and the things that we're really dealing with in regards to COVID, just some of the conversation that we had today. But I want to thank you so much for taking the time and bringing us up to date, and also being able to share your thoughts with us as well.
I always love talking to you, so I've had a good time, and thank you for giving me the chance to do it.
All righty. Thanks much. We'll talk to you soon.